I would like to take this opportunity to express my delight that you have all come here in this way, meaning that you have come here in order to study Dhamma. I will do everything that I can to help you to be successful in this endeavor. At this first stage, I would like to tell you all that the genuine and true fruit of the study of Dhamma is to realize a new life. This new life is something we must have. It is something completely opposite to the old way of life. This word new is ambiguous. For example, we use it to say a new car or even a new wife, which isn't really true. It's the same old car and the same old wife. The new we're talking about must be completely opposite to the old. This new life is completely different from the old life. That old life is trapped within the power and influence of positivism and negativism. So the new life must be out from under that power and be free of positivism and negativism. Most people aren't willing to believe that this is possible. Most people can't accept that we can have a life that is free and independent from the positive and the negative. If you're not quite willing to accept this right now, then please at least be willing to listen carefully and with an open mind. To be a real Christian, to be a good and correct Christian, is to have the new life. But none of you are good and correct Christians. You're all trapped. You haven't listened to God's commandment. And so when God said not to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you didn't listen. And for this reason, you are now trapped under the power of good and evil. Please listen to what God has said and start to follow his commandment in order to be a real Christian, in order to have the new life. Nowadays, all Christians have eaten this fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so all so-called Christians are trapped under the power of good and evil. So where can we find a real Christian these days? Even in the teachings of Jesus Christ himself, there is nothing about this very important matter. There's nothing about removing the influence of good and evil. There are only teachings about loving one's fellow human beings and so forth. So let's go back to the original commandment of God, the first words of God which appear in the Bible. And let's practice according to them. And then we will also have the heart of Buddhism. Let's go back and review this original commandment of God. God told Adam and Eve not to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But Adam and Eve went and ate it, and all human beings since are eating this fruit as well. And so we've become deluded by, we've gotten lost, become trapped in good and evil. We've gotten all caught up in these good and evil. And for this reason, we all must die. God warned that if anyone ate this fruit, the result would be death. And so all of us who are eating this fruit must die. Die in this place means to experience dukkha, suffering, that which torments the heart and mind. The good or the positive is not peace, and the bad or the negative is not peace either. Both of these are just their different aspects of trouble and fuss and disturbance, and neither of them are peaceful. True peace has nothing to do with good and evil. Real peace is beyond good and evil. If we're interested in peace, we must go beyond these things, good and evil. Therefore, if you're a real Christian already, there's no need for you to come and study Buddhism, because Buddhism also aspires to transcend good and evil. If you've already done this, then there's no point in studying Buddhism. Now all of you have eaten that fruit. It's in your bellies. And for this reason, you have committed the original sin, and for that sin, you all must die. But if you're wise, you will search for the medicine that will cause you to vomit that fruit up, so that you will be free of it. And that medicine is Buddhism. When we have taken this medicine which makes us vomit up this toxin, this poison, then we are emancipated. Emancipated is to have passed beyond, to be liberated from all that good and evil. So thus it is that we study Buddhism in order to vomit up the poison and toxin of ignorance, of not knowing, or of attaching, of clinging to things as good and evil, as I and mine. So this is why we come to study Buddhism. So please listen carefully in order to study Buddhism correctly. And then you will be able to free yourself of this poison and enter into the new life. Please calm down any thoughts about this being impossible. If you're thinking this way, then let that quiet down for a while and give this a chance. Incline your minds to the possibility that this can really happen, and then study Buddhism correctly according to the genuine teachings and principles of Buddhism. And once we understand those principles correctly, then we practice them, we apply them correctly. And if this is done, then we all have the chance to live the new life. This is something eminently possible for all of us, so please give it your undivided attention. So now we come to the activity of studying. And to do this study correctly, we must all be scientists. So please stop being farmers, merchants, civil servants, bankers, lawyers, doctors, teachers, whatever, and become, every one of you, scientists. With this attitude, the attitude of the scientist, we will be able to study Buddhism correctly. We need to give up being philosophers caught up in speculations, opinions, and theories which have no end. We need to give up being psychologists and psychiatrists, as they are in the world these days, that operate only on theories, and become the kind of psychologists and psychiatrists who are true scientists. Give up being logicians and all these other speculative fields, and become true scientists who deal with the reality of life. And in this way, we will be able to learn about Buddhism. Buddhism is not a philosophy, it is a science. Although sometimes we may talk about it as a philosophy a little bit here and there, this will not be successful. We need to approach Buddhism as a science. That is the only way that we can be successful in its study. Most people like to study Buddhism as a philosophy, and so they don't have any idea what Buddhism is. They've never come close to what it really is. We have to approach it as a science. So calm down those ideas and tendencies to philosophize and speculate and form opinions, and come at Buddhism with a truly scientific attitude in perspective. If we do this, we will be able to realize Buddhism as it truly is. Even the approach to Buddhism, which is scientific, has its different levels. We can approach Buddhist science as physical science, psychic science, or spiritual science. But here we need to be primarily interested, especially interested in the spiritual science of Buddhism. So the physical and mental, psychical aspects, why not just leave them aside for now to focus our attention on the spiritual aspect, which is crucial for our lives. True science must deal with actual existing objects, with real things. Philosophy deals with hypotheses and ideas which are not real. So in Buddhist science, we need to deal with things that are actually happening, with real things occurring within our lives, instead of mere hypotheses about our lives. And most of all, we need to study with the reality of dukkha, of suffering, of pain and sorrow within our own lives. We have to take these realities, and have them arise within our minds clearly, distinctly, directly, and experience them there directly. And then we can investigate them, experiment them, research them in order to see where these things come from and where they are going. Only in this way can we find any success in our study of Buddhism. Most of all, we have to study right here at this thing called life. This is what we have to take up and become clear about and investigate. This life, our own lives. But don't be foolish and concentrate on the physical aspects of life, this business of living protoplasm and all that in the cells of the body is not very significant. That's not the meaning of human life. That has nothing to do, or very little to do, with Dhamma. Instead, it's the mind, the functions, the behavior, the activity of the mind which takes place within the body or based upon the body. This is what we need to study and investigate if we are going to understand Buddhism. We have to study the activity of mind. The subject matter, the raw material of our experiment that we have to bring into our laboratory is called the Ayatana Thama.
Ayatana Tham. สิ่งที่เนื่องกันอยู่กับอายตนะ
The things that are associated with the ayatana.
ไม่รู้จะแปลว่าอะไรคำนี้
The ayatana, it's difficult to translate, so we just tell you what they are. These ayatanika tham, there are 30 objects in this, 5 groups. Each group has 6 things within it, which makes a total of 30. The first group is the internal ayatana. The internal ayatana are the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, the 6 inner sense organs or bases. The second group are the external ayatana. These are the sights, sounds, smells, flavors, touches, and mind objects, mental things. These are the 6 external sense objects. The third group is sense consciousness, vijnana, the basic awareness of the mind towards any sense stimuli. And so there's 6 kinds of this sense consciousness, that based on the eye, the ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. This is the third group of 6. The fourth group is the patsa, or sense contact, when for any of these 3 things come together and meet. For example, the eye, a sight, and eye consciousness come together, there is what we call patsa, or contact, sense contact. This is when there is a sense experience. And then the 5th group, and there are 6 kinds of contacts based on the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind again. And then the 5th group are the vedana, the feelings which arise in response, in reaction to the sense activity. And so there are feelings towards eye experience or seeing, towards hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, bodily sensitivity, and then mental objects. These are the 30 ayatanika dhamma, or tham, the things associated with the ayatana, the senses. These are the 30 things that you need to know and understand if you're going to study Dhamma or Buddhism. It's the same as we have to know the vowels and consonants first before we can go on and learn how to read and write and all that. So we begin by learning about these ayatana, and in order to be able to study Dhamma. To study Dhamma, we need to know these 30 things, these 5 groups of things. And to know these things means much more than just memorizing their names or noting them down in a notebook or any kind of such intellectual activity. That isn't enough. We have to really know them. And this means to know them through our own experience, to study them as they happen in our lives. In any day, all of these 30 things are occurring, and not just once, but many, many times. We're experiencing these different things each and every day of our life. To know them, we have to observe their activity, their functioning within our lives. We have to experience this fully as it occurs. This is what we must do if we are to study and understand Dhamma. We must observe the internal ayatana, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, the external sense objects, the sense consciousness, the sense contact, and the feelings which arise towards all that. This is what we must study as it occurs within the mind. In spiritual matters, in Dhamma, to study something can only take place when it exists within our mind. Otherwise, we're just fantasizing. We're just thinking about things. Instead, we must observe the activity of these things as they are occurring within consciousness. This is where we study these 30 things. Each day, as they occur over and over again, one after the other, we study this from day to day to day within our own lives and own experience. And this is how we come to understand these 30 things within the experience of our own lives. And this is the basis for our study of Dhamma. These are the things that are happening over and over again all the time, every day of our lives. They're happening every day, but still we don't know anything about them. We haven't really taken any time to study them. We're not even interested in observing what makes up the experience of our lives. So we tend to ignore the reality of these 30 things. So let's start to take a look at them, to observe how they work and function. So we start with the inner ayatana, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And then the external ayatana. And we study how they work and function and how vijnana, consciousness, arises. Let's begin just with this. For example, the eye. The eye sees a shape, a form. And then vijnana, eye consciousness, arises. The basic sense awareness, the basic level of mental awareness arises. And then there is seeing. Or there's ear and sound, and then ear consciousness. And then nose and smell and nose consciousness, the three coming together. The same happens with the tongue and tastes, the body and touches, and the mind and mental objects. This is the basic reality of our own lives, but we never take any time to observe it. We haven't really gotten interested in this thing. Well, now it's time to study these things. And so we'll start by looking at how the inner ayatana, the outer ayatana, and the vijnana, or sense consciousness, operate. You need to understand that within the body and the internal ayatana, there is a system of nerves. We have a nervous system. And when some external stimulus, such as a form or a sound, makes contact with this nervous system, then there is a reaction, a response that occurs automatically. This happens naturally. It happens by itself. It doesn't depend on the existence of a self, an ego, or a soul. It just happens by itself. And this is the beginning of our understanding of anatta, the truth of not self. That the basic sense activity, sense stimulus, occurs by itself naturally. It's just a function of our bodies and their nervous systems. And that's all. There's no self or soul involved. And once these, say, the internal and the external ayatana come into contact, then there arises the thing we call vijnana, sense consciousness. This consciousness at first isn't there, but once the eye and a shape come into contact, into relationship, then there arises consciousness, sense consciousness. This sense consciousness comes up by itself once these first two are in relationship. This happens naturally. It's just the way things work. And this consciousness itself is no self or soul. It's no atta or atman or ego or whatever you want to call it. They're just things occurring within life. This is the beginning of our understanding of anatta. If you understand the inner ayatana, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, in the external ayatana and the sense consciousness as being anatta, if you truly understand that through your own experience, then you have understood these three things correctly. When you realize that there is just the functions of the nervous system occurring naturally in the eyes, ears, and so forth, and the external sense objects, when you realize this, then you are beginning to see or understand or practice science. If you still think that these things are occurring because of some self or soul or ego or whatever you want to call it, if you have some self-view on these things, then it isn't Buddhism at all. Your understanding is not Buddhist, but it is animism instead. But once we see that all this sense activity, the sense organs, the sense objects, the sense consciousness, when we see that all this has nothing to do with selves or souls or egos, then we are beginning to practice science. And when it is becoming science in this way, then we can progress along the correct path. and we will move in the right direction. Buddhism teaches anatta, or the truth, the fact of not self. This is not a doctrine. It is a truth that we can realize for ourselves. Anatta means that there is no such thing as a self, as a soul, an ego, a spirit, an atman, any of these different things, an individual, the person. All these words we use based in an egoistic perspective upon life. All these words are illusions. They do not point to any true reality. This is Buddhism. The Buddha, when he taught, was teaching this truth of anatta. But we should understand that before there was Buddhism, there was Hinduism, or the Brahmanistic teachings. Even in India, these teachings existed before the Buddha appeared. And so when the Buddha started teaching about not self, there was a bit of conflict or contradiction towards the standard beliefs of most of the population. And so it was very difficult for many people to understand and accept the truth. But what the Buddha realized was that in order to eliminate suffering from the human mind, in order to free human life from the problem of dukkha, one had to penetrate to the fact of anatta, of not self. If we're still clinging and grasping and clutching at the belief or the idea of a self or a soul or whatever, then there will always follow dukkha. The mind will be tormented, the mind will suffer because of that attachment, that clinging. When the Buddha saw this, he saw that it was also necessary to teach the truth of anatta. This is the genuine truth of Buddhism. Please don't confuse it with some of the Hindu teachings which do not share this understanding. There's something which confuses this whole matter, and this is what people call the astral body. In Buddhism, there is no such thing. There's no teaching about anything called an astral body. It comes from someplace else. And this thing that people call an astral body doesn't in itself have any genuine reality. There is merely the consciousness, the awareness of the mind. And then there is also what we now call the subconscious. Now maybe this subconsciousness has been confused with what some people call the astral body or the divine body or whatever. But all there is consciousness and, if you want, subconsciousness. But this thing, the astral body, doesn't actually exist. It has no place in Buddhism. So please don't drag it in, because if you drag this idea in, you'll confuse everything about Buddhism, and you won't be able to understand what Buddhism has to offer. So now we've studied the science of the first three things, the internal ayatana, the external ayatana, and vijnana, sense consciousness. These are the first three things, and now we can come to the fourth. The fourth is patsa. Patsa, or sense contact, occurs when these three things we've already mentioned meet and function in cooperation, in tandem. So there's the internal sense organs such as the eye, the external sense object, the sight, and then eye consciousness. When these three come together, then there is patsa. We can see this as sense consciousness is aware, it sees, it knows the object, the sense object, through or dependent upon the sense organ, the sense apparatus. These three functioning together is what we call contact. This contact occurs countless times every day. It's happening all throughout our lives, but still we never pay any attention to it. We haven't studied it, and so we don't understand it. Many people think it's merely the sense organs and the sense objects doing something, reacting together. If we see it in this way, then we haven't realized what's really going on. It's not just two things, it's three ingredients. There is also the sense consciousness, the mental aspect. All three of them together is the contact that we need to study and learn about. If we don't understand this thing, then we'll never be able to control it. And if we don't control it, then it will get out of control and lead to all kinds of trouble and dukkha. It will get stirred up into the defilements, into things like greed, anger, confusion, fear, and worry. And so we have to understand this patsa, this contact, in order to be able to control it. If we don't do this, we'll never get a hand on dukkha. This thing called patsa has two levels or two stages. And so let's investigate this a bit. When first the eyes see a form, say the eyes see the color pink, and then consciousness arises, there is just a material contact. There is contact with the material object. Through the organ, the mind, the consciousness makes contact with the color pink, a certain frequency of light waves. This is the first level of contact. It's very simple, very basic. But then the mind will plunge deeper into that experience. The contact deepens, and then there is we say contact with the meaning of the object, such as at first there's just color pink, but then as the contact deepens, there is the meaning of, say, a rose or something pleasant, something agreeable and desirable. And then there is contact with the meaning of the things. This is very important. The one is just a very basic level of making contact, of experiencing a mental thing. But the second, which is just a kind of recognition. But then the mind plunges in further, the contact deepens, and then it becomes aware of the meaning or value of something. The first kind of contact is called Batika Sampatsa, Batika contact, which is just this basic contact with the material thing. For example, it's just like the waves of something, either light waves or sound waves or particles of things floating into the nose, or the sense activity on the tongue, or physical stimuli on the body, whatever. It's just this kind of thing, the movement of waves making contact with the nervous system. Very basic material thing. But then it goes deeper and finds some meaning or value in the thing. For example, seeing a human shape, a human form. That's just Batika Sampat. But then it deepens into Atiwajana Sampatsa, or Atiwajana contact, which is in a human form, to see either man or woman, and then all of a sudden it has meaning or value, depending on the kind of meaning, depends on our own perspective. But then all of a sudden the experience has meaning. And this is the aspect or level of contact which becomes a problem. The first level is just natural and basic, and it doesn't involve any problems. But this second level doesn't have to, but it often gets out of control and turns into problems for us because of our misunderstanding. So to understand Patsa clearly, we should investigate these two levels, the Batika, the basic material contact, and the Atiwajana contact, or the contact with the meaning or value of a thing. So when there is the first kind of contact, of Patsa, then there is a material value. The mind contacts a material value. When it's the second order of contact, the mind makes contacts a thing, the meaning or the value, a mental meaning or value in the thing. The first kind isn't very important. It doesn't get turned into any kind of problems. It's just a basic thing. But the second kind has a lot of meaning and is very important for our understanding of Dhamma and of how the mind works. Now, there's another two things which we need to know about, another two kinds of contact which we need to understand. These are foolish contact and intelligent contact. When the mind is in an ignorant or foolish state and then contact occurs, then that contact is foolish or ignorant. But when the mind is wise, it has knowledge, it's intelligent at the moment of contact, then the contact is called wise contact. This is another crucial distinction for us to investigate. If there is ignorance, or which avijja, not knowing, or wrong knowing, stupidity, foolishness, ignorance in the mind at the moment of contact, then that contact will also be foolish, and it will stir up into suffering, into attachments, into desires, into a variety of problems, all happening because that original contact takes place under the influence of ignorance, of foolishness. But if at the moment of contact there is correct knowledge, vicca, or wisdom, panya, then the contact is intelligent, it's wise, and no problems will result. The ignorant contact will always be harmful. It will always bring some harmful result to our lives. But when the contact is wise, there is no harmful result, and then it is possible to make the most of that experience and opportunity. So we should investigate the difference between wise contact and ignorant contact. When we say intelligent, don't confuse it with the intellect or think it's merely an intellectual matter. This thing, intellect, we don't really trust it very much because it can be fooled, it can be diluted. And so we prefer to talk about wisdom, about vicca, correct knowledge, instead of mere intellectual understanding. It's necessary for contact to be wise, for there to be a truly profound and correct understanding of it. When this happens, no problems will result from contact. But if it's merely intellect and intellectual understanding, then although we might have some ideas or opinions about the contact, we can still miss the reality, we can still misunderstand, and then this will lead to foolish contact, which will lead to all kinds of incorrect activity of mind, which turns into dukkha. So be very careful about the difference between wise contact and merely intellectual understanding, which can still be foolish. If there is, at the moment of contact, if there is mindfulness, the ability of the mind to be completely aware and awake to the experience, if there is this mindfulness, and then there is wisdom, correct knowledge and understanding of the things we need to know, and there is ready comprehension, a comprehensive view as we apply wisdom. If these things are all present at the moment of contact, then that contact will be wise. When the contact is wise, the mind doesn't get trapped within good and evil. The mind can be free of these limited conceptions and beliefs. And then that mind is experiencing the new life. But if there's not enough mindfulness, not enough wisdom and ready comprehension at contact, then it is foolish, and the mind can be deceived into good and evil, into desires and attachments, and this will always lead to dukkha. So be very careful that it is wise contact, because wise contact is correct, and when it is correct, it follows the right path of life, and that is the new life. But if it's foolish contact, then it's incorrect, and it leads to all kinds of problems and suffering. So we need to study this difference. We need to examine it in our own experience. So now we'll move on to the fifth thing, the feelings. When contact is ignorant, then the resulting feeling will be ignorant. When contact is wise, then the resulting contact will be wise. Let's see what happens with these different kinds of feelings. If at the moment of contact there is a lack of knowledge or wrong understanding, then there arises ignorant, foolish, deluded feeling. And so if the object, the experience is pleasant, then it is taken to be good. Or if the object is unpleasant and disagreeable, it is taken to be bad. And so this is how ignorance arises with the feeling. Things are taken to be good and bad. This is where the fruit of that tree is eaten, right here at this moment where ignorant feeling arises. And then as the mind is getting caught within the meaning of good and evil, it attaches to this, and this always leads to dukkha, to suffering, to mental agitation, conflict, and so forth. On the other hand, when it's wise contact, when the sensory contact takes place with wisdom, with correct knowledge, with right understanding, then the feeling is wise. Whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or whatever, it's wise. And so the mind sees that it doesn't see it as good and evil. There's no good and evil. The mind is aware that everything takes place according to its own principles, the nature, the natural laws of these things. And instead of discriminating as good and evil, as happens when there is foolishness, the mind just sees things as they are. And so the mind doesn't bite that fruit. And then this wise feeling doesn't become the basis for suffering. So examine this. See that how wise feeling or how ignorant feeling arises and how it leads to the foolish discrimination of things as good and evil, and then all the problems that leads to. Or on the other hand, how wise feeling arises and how that doesn't lead to any problems. When it's wise feeling, the mind continues to function correctly. No problems are stirred up. The mind doesn't make mistakes. And so it is free. It's free of the burden of good and evil. It's free of all suffering. This is how the feelings work. So what do you think? Were Adam and Eve born when God made the world, or soon after? Or were Adam and Eve born when you were born from your mother's womb? What do you think? If you think Adam and Eve were born when God created the world, please raise your hand. If you think Adam and Eve were born at the moment of your own birth, please raise your hand. Nobody knows anything. If Adam and Eve were born when God created the world, then it's not that significant for us because it happened a very long time ago. But when they say that original sin has been passed on down through all the generations of human history until this moment, that is quite frightening. In reality, in truth, Adam and Eve are born at the moment we are born from our mother's womb. This is the birth of Adam and Eve. And then because of a lack of knowledge, because when we're infants, soon after birth, we don't have any understanding of life, of how the world works. We're ignorant. We're lacking in knowledge and wisdom. And so we discriminate things as good and evil and get caught up in all that mess. The young infant, all infants, including ourselves, we don't have the knowledge. And so when when something agrees with us, when we're a little child, when something agrees with us, we thought it was good. We discriminated it as good. And when something disagreed with us, we categorized it as evil. And this became a habitual response and has carried on throughout the rest of our lives. The moment of original sin occurs right there when the child discriminates what are merely pleasant and unpleasant feelings into good and evil. That's the original sin that leads to spiritual death. As soon as the infant has developed enough that it is possible for patsa, for contact, to occur. When the sense organs in the nervous system is sufficiently developed for patsa to occur, for contact, then there will arise feelings, and then original sin takes place, where the infant discriminates good and evil. This good and evil that we get caught in at such an early age is really a mess. Good causes all kinds of troubles and problems and hassles and fuss of one kind, and then evil has all the troubles and hassles and fuss of evil. It's a real mess. It keeps our minds always burning and boiling and bubbling throughout our lives. It's much better to be free of all this good and evil, to transcend it, to be beyond it, to be out from under the power of good and evil. And so this is why we study this matter of contact and Vedana. This is the original sin. This is the Adam and Eve that is of the greatest importance to each and every one of us, even if we're not Christians. All we say is that when the infant is born and then the sense apparatus is functioning, then there will arise contact, and there will be a point where the child discriminates what is pleasant or what is unpleasant, and then because of ignorance turns that into positive and negative, which becomes good and evil and leads to all the various problems and hassles or suffering of our lives. Before that moment, although the child is alive, before the child makes that discrimination between agreeable and disagreeable or likable and unlikable, before that moment there's no problem. But as soon as that distinction, the separation, occurs between pleasant and unpleasant, then that grows into positive and negative, good and evil, and then the infant's mind becomes trapped within the limitations, the foolishness of good and evil. Neither of these are peaceful. Neither good nor evil is peaceful for the mind. It bubbles and boils within the mind. And so God, out of great pity for mankind, had the intention to warn mankind. And so God said, don't eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you do, you will die. God warned mankind way back in the beginning, but because of our stubbornness and stupidity, we've ignored the warning. Buddhism has the same intention, to save mankind from all that suffering, but very few people seem to be interested. All of us now have not heeded the warning, and so we have eaten this fruit. And so the situation we are in is, if we are wise enough, is how are we going to vomit up this poisoned fruit? How are we going to cough it up and spit it up in order to be free of this? What we must do is we have to study and observe and learn how this good and evil, the positivism and negativism, arises. And we do that by studying these 30 ayatanika tam. If we study these and understand them, then we will know how good and evil arises. And with that knowledge, we can free ourselves from their power and influence. And then the mind is free, life is at peace, and that is the meaning of new life. Now let's talk about it in childish terms instead of in the preceding scientific terms. Let's talk in very simple terms of gladness and sadness. These things, gladness and sadness, do you think there's any difference between them? Most people think there is, and this shows that they haven't understood them yet. Once we understand sadness and gladness, we'll see that there's really no difference between the two. If we're really glad and carried away with being glad and happy, then we're unable to sleep, and food doesn't taste very good. When we're sad, when we're lost in sadness, well, we can't sleep either, and food doesn't taste very good as well. When we're caught up in these things like gladness, gladness and sadness, then it makes it impossible to sleep and to eat food in a pleasant way. But when the mind is free of both gladness and sadness, then it's very easy to sleep and food always tastes good. These are very simple ways to look at it. Sadness and gladness, or good, lead to good and evil, and this enslaves us. And so that's why God warned mankind to not eat the fruit that leads to the knowledge, the knowing of good and evil. Through that knowledge, we become enslaved to good and enslaved to evil. And that is a very heavy burden to bear. When we're enslaved in this way, there's no freedom. When we're enslaved to good, it leads to all kinds of toil and desires and struggle after the good. And when enslaved to evil, it leads to all kinds of toil and desires and struggle to get away from the evil. And this is nothing but enslavement and suffering. Why not get out of that enslavement? Why not become liberated, to be free of good and evil, where the mind is still and calm? When the mind is trapped within good and evil, there's no calmness and no peace. The mind is never at ease. But when still and calm and free of good and evil, the mind is at peace and at ease. You ought to see which one of these is more worth living. The one that is worth living is the meaning of new life. We, by now, or everyone is probably willing to accept that all human beings in the world like things that are good and pleasant, like gladness, pleasantness, happiness, positiveness. We can all accept that this is what everyone likes. But when we like these things, then we want them and we chase after them, we become enslaved to them, and then we aren't free. On the other hand, nobody likes things that are evil, that are unpleasant, that are negative. And so we try to get away from these things, and in that way, we get caught up with and enslaved by negativism, by evil. If we were just aware of these evil things without getting caught up in the meaning, getting trapped within the meaning of this word evil, then there would be no problem, and the mind would remain free. But because of our foolishness, we get trapped within the meanings of these words, good and evil, and this leads us around by the nose endlessly. So why not study these matters and see what the situation is, and learn how to be free of all the suffering, all the pain created by this enslavement to good and evil. God warned us a long, long time ago in one sentence, but we haven't listened. And so we need to start over again and examine the situation. The old life is the life that is caught up in good and evil, which is entrapped by them and which suffers because of that. That's the old life. But when life understands, when we understand these things called good and evil, and no longer have the foolish knowledge that entraps, but have genuine wisdom regarding good and evil, so that we are either in the middle, not caught up in these extremes of good and evil, or above good and evil. This means that the mind, when it is above them, that it is free of them and no longer trapped by them. And then this is the meaning of new life. We told you in the beginning that if you studied Buddhism correctly, then the result would be the new life that is free of positivism and negativism, that is not trapped by good and evil. So please study this matter carefully. If you are a good Christian, then you will not be enslaved by good and evil. And if you're a good Buddhist, then you will not be enslaved by good and evil either. We have taken some time to compare these two, to understand what it is like when the mind is free of good and evil. We have been studying, looking for this point of commonality between Christianity and Buddhism in order that we can work together for us all to transcend good and evil, for us all to transcend suffering. And so we have made this comparison in the spirit of friendship and mutual understanding. If you're a good Christian, then you'll be a good Buddhist also, if you've been understanding what we've been talking about. And if you're a good Buddhist, you'll be a good Christian as well. Now, if you don't agree with that, that's up to you. But this is how we see things, and this has been our intention in talking as we have today, in order for us to work together, to cooperate, so that we can all get free of the enslavement to good and evil, so that we all may have new life. If we're going to be a good Buddhist and a good Christian, then we have to be able to control the thing we call patsa, or sense contact. If we can't control patsa, then there's no way we can be good Christians and good Buddhists, because when we don't control sense contact, we'll always get enslaved in good and evil. So let's study this matter carefully so that we have sufficient understanding in order to control sense contact, and then we'll all be both good Christians and good Buddhists. So this is why we've been talking about this matter, and we'll, in the next talk, we'll examine these issues further. To summarize all this about patsa, we've got a little slogan or verse that we like, and we hope the translator can get it right.
ความทุกข์จะไม่โผล่
Suffering is born in the mind because we err at patsa. Dukkha is born in the mind because we err, that is, make a mistake, at patsa. ครับ
ความทุกข์จะไม่โผล่ถ้าไม่โง่เมื่อผัสสะความทุกข์จะไม่โผล่ถ้าไม่โง่เมื่อผัสสะ
Dukkha won't shoot up if we're not stupid during patsa.
Cannot peep out. ความทุกข์จะไม่โผล่ถ้าไม่โง่เมื่อผัสสะ ความทุกข์เกิดไม่ได้ถ้าเข้าใจเรื่องผัสสะ
Dukkha can't arise if we understand the matter of patsa.
ฟังอีกทีว่าความทุกข์เกิดที่จิตเพราะทำผิดเมื่อผัสสะความทุกข์จะไม่โผล่ถ้าไม่โง่เมื่อผัสสะความทุกข์เกิดไม่ได้ถ้าเข้าใจเรื่องผัสสะเราจะต้องพยายามทำความเข้าใจจนเราควบคุมผัสสะให้ได้ควบคุมผัสสะให้ได้เราก็จะควบคุมความโง่ discriminate เป็น good and evil ได้และความหมายแห่ง good and evil ก็จะไม่ครอบงำเราเรื่องก็จะจบ
We'll go through the verse again. Dukkha doesn't arise in the mind if we're Dukkha arises in the mind because we err at patsa. Dukkha won't shoot up if we're not stupid at patsa. We won't be stupid at patsa if we understand the matter or the story of patsa. So, to summarize, it is necessary for us as human beings to understand this matter of patsa fully and correctly in order to control it, to keep it within safe and healthy limits. If we can't control it, if we're still foolish about this matter, then it will always lead into getting caught up, into being enslaved to good and evil. And then our life is trapped within these limitations, and that is dukkha, is suffering, is conflict, and so forth. So this is the subject matter that we ought to pay especial attention to if we are going to understand Buddhism correctly and realize the fruit of new life. And this is where the story, the matter, finishes. So now you've been sitting for a long time and your bodies are feeling stiff and tired. And so the influence of good and evil is starting to arise. And so we better end now. If you're interested, come back tomorrow and we'll discuss patsa, this matter of patsa, in more detail, in order to be the master of sense contact. Today, we'd like to talk about the value of new life. However, the matter of the old life hasn't been completed yet, and so we'll have to talk about the old life a bit first. And so we'll be talking some more about patsa, sense contact. Yesterday, we talked about the matter of patsa, contact, and vedana, feeling. We were speaking about the 30 ayatanika tham, the 30 objects or matters of study which we must bring into our laboratory in order to research this matter of Dhamma. And so please prepare yourselves now for us to go into this in greater detail, in more subtlety. Please prepare yourselves to listen carefully. In Buddhism, we hold that the feelings are the originating cause of all problems. For this reason, it is taken to be the most important subject, these vedana, which we can say are the original cause of all problems. And when it's like this with the vedana, then we also must be very interested in patsa, contact, in that contact is the originating cause of the feelings of vedana. So please examine this subject very carefully, this very important matter of the feelings which are the original cause of all our problems, and patsa, which is the cause of the feelings. We need to study these feelings, the vedana, within the experience of daily life. And in that experience we can learn about the three kinds of vedana: pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling. There are these three basic kinds of feelings. Please understand these things genuinely. Don't just learn their names. We need a deeper understanding of that. So examine these vedana as they're happening today in your own life. Especially examine them so you understand them in their position of being the cause of all the troublesome difficulties and hassles that arise in our lives. Whether these arise each day dozens or hundreds or thousands of times is something that you may not even know if you haven't yet examined them carefully. If we haven't been watching, then this whole matter is something which we don't know anything about. So we need to start to observe them, because these vedana are what conjure up, concoct up, stir up all the different kinds of thoughts and ideas and likes and preferences, wishes, desires, aspirations, all the various actions and intentional activities of our lives are stirred up, are concocted by these different kinds of Vedana. And so we need to give them a great deal of attention. All the civilizations which have arisen on this planet have their origins in the feelings. The rise of each civilization is caused by the feelings, and the expansion and all that, the conquering, the power-seeking of all these various civilizations is also rooted in the Vedana. Whatever civilization it is that has arisen on this planet or anywhere in the universe, all of them are motivated by these Vedana, the feelings. All the progress and developments in modern science are also coming from the Vedana. The developments in nuclear things, in electronics, computers, in space exploration, and semiconductors, and all these things are spurred on by the Vedana because of the satisfaction that various scientists and researchers have towards in the various Vedana. They explore, they seek, they search for these various inventions and discoveries which will supply those feelings. And so all the progress in going into space, the projects going to the moon and even further, all of these are stirred up and spurred on by the feelings. All these things, all developments in human intelligence and human knowledge have been encouraged and conditioned by the seeking of the feelings. Even the very fundamental evolution that we call bioevolution, even this is rooted in the feelings. When one level of life evolves into a higher level, this change, this mutation is stirred up by the feelings, by the Vedana, this feeling or awareness which leads to desire, to want. And so then the organism goes through various changes to achieve its wants. This is caused by the Vedana, by the feelings. All these different actions and progress within life can be traced to the Vedana and the desires caused by the Vedana. If you go back and examine all the stages of evolution of life on this planet, you can see this crucial role which the Vedana, the feelings, play. The basic principle of all this is that the feelings give rise to need or want or desire, which in turn gives rise to activities. And from our actions and behavior, there come certain results, which lead to further feelings. And so there are the feelings causing desires and wants, which further cause action, behavior, all the different activities of our life, which bring about the various results and effects which occur within our lives. This happens in all situations, even in your own case, those of you who are traveling around the world in order to study and learn. This too is happening because of the feelings. All the feelings are leading, even the feelings which haven't arisen yet, those that are still in the future. Nonetheless, we can conceive of them, we can hope for them, we can expect them. And then this leads to desires for those feelings which haven't come yet. And that desire leads to all kinds of actions and so forth. So there are these three basic levels taking place. First there is phassa, sense contact, which causes feeling. That's the first level. And then feeling conditions want and desire. And then want and desire conditions activities, actions and behavior. And this is the third level. All the things we're doing, everything can be traced to the Vedana, to the feelings in this way. The feelings are the basic impulse behind all our movements and all the things we try to do in our lives. When we're sitting here and we feel uncomfortable, that is the impulse that causes us to move our body in order to change the feeling that is taking place. In this way, and in similar ways, the Vedana are the basic impulse leading to all the movements, all the desires, all the wants, all the change that occurs in our lives. Always searching, always looking to get certain kinds of feelings and avoid other kinds. In this way, all the different kinds of human awareness are affected and influenced by the feelings. Even the people who believe in rebirth or reincarnation or whatever, this is also caused by the feelings. Because of certain feelings, people want to go and be reborn in a certain state or condition or heaven or place or whatever, in order to get the feelings they think will be there. So rebirth is caused by the Vedana. Even wanting to be with God, even wanting to go to the kingdom of God, this belief is also rooted in the feelings. This desire to be with God is a desire of the feelings, the wanting of the feelings, in order to get the certain feelings which we think are associated with the kingdom of God. Whatever kind of hope, want, aspiration, goal, or whatever, all of them can be traced to the feelings. And so this, if you can start to understand this, then you will be starting to understand the fundamental principle of Buddhism that says that everything originates from the Vedana. Even the desire to die is coming from the Vedana, because we want to get out of or change from the current feelings. Then this leads sometimes to the desire to die, or even the desire to live is caused by the wanting the kind of feelings that we're experiencing now in this life. Whatever kind of want or aspiration or goal, all of these things, everything that exists can be traced to the Vedana one way or another. All the different sentient beings, whether all the beings that have the ability to sense, all of them, whether on a very low level or the animal level or the human level or the so-called divine or angelic heavenly levels, whatever level of sentient being it is, all have fallen under, have been enslaved, are trapped within the feelings. If we look at this from the negative or pessimistic view, we'll say that the Vedana are the things to which we are enslaved. If we take an optimistic or positive view, we'll say that the Vedana are the things that motivate, that push us to do all the things that push us to progress and develop in life. Let us stress once again that all of you who have saved up your money have worked to save up money in order to travel and wander around the world. This is motivated. What is pushing you? If you look, you'll see that it's the desire for feelings, for a change of feelings. You want to get some new feelings. All this traveling can be traced to this. Those of you who are traveling around, traveling as part of your studies, even these studies are being pushed and motivated by the feelings, wanting to get some new feelings, wanting to change the feelings. Everything is motivated by these feelings. So please study them very carefully, because these Vedana are actually more powerful even than God. Excuse us for saying so, but God doesn't have near as much power and control over us as the feelings do. These feelings have much more ability to force us to do this and that than even God does. So we need to study them most carefully. Therefore, if we want the old life, then we'll continue to be slaves to the Vedana. However, if we want new life, then we need to become masters of the Vedana. Which one do you want? What choice will you make? If you're interested in new life, then we have to learn how to be the masters of the feelings. And so we must come and study them, examine them very closely. If you're interested in the new life, then please join us as we examine this matter further. Don't forget now that we've all eaten that fruit that makes us know good and evil. We're all the descendants of Adam and Eve, and so we've eaten this fruit long, long ago. Remember that from eating this fruit now, we've gotten trapped under the power of good and evil. And this good and evil is really nothing but the feelings. Feelings give rise to good and evil. Good and evil are just the wants and likes and dislikes of the feelings. Since we've eaten this fruit already, now it's time to vomit up this fruit which is causing us all that trouble. And so it's time to study the Vedana in order to learn, to find, to discover the knowledge that will enable us to vomit up that fruit. And so we come to study Buddhism with the Dhamma, which will provide us with that knowledge, which contains that knowledge. There are a few more things about the feelings which we need to look into. For example, when we talk about good and evil, that's only two things, which isn't really enough. In Buddhism, we don't say that there are just two kinds of feelings, just good feelings and bad feelings, but we hold that there are three. So there's both good feeling and then bad feeling, which everybody can recognize, but there's also a third kind of feeling where we can't classify it. We're unable to classify it as good or bad. So when we do this classification, don't settle for just two categories. We ought to be aware of three. We can classify them as good feelings, bad feelings, and the ones where we can't say whether it's good or bad. We need to understand this third kind of feeling if we're going to have a complete understanding of the feelings. When people are classifying things as good and evil or positive and negative, that isn't enough. It doesn't encompass the entire situation. There's a third thing which is in the middle, which is between good and evil or positive and negative. So we need to understand this thing. When the feeling is good or pleasant or positive, whatever you want to call it, that draws the mind towards it, that pulls the mind, attracts the mind. When the feeling is evil, bad, or negative, that repels the mind. The mind either wants to destroy that feeling or run away from it. But there's the third feeling which makes the mind wonder and doubt. It doesn't know whether this is good or bad. And so instead of moving towards it as it does with pleasant, good feelings, or moving away, running away as with the bad feelings, it runs in circles. The mind spins around and around this feeling because it doesn't know what to do. We're not sure exactly what to call this third kind of feeling. We could call it unclassifiable or not yet classifiable or uncertain or whatever. But the point is to understand the effect or the influence it has on the mind. The good, pleasant feelings give rise to what we call raga or lust. The bad feelings cause tosa, anger, hatred. And then that third kind of feeling, that unclassifiable kind, gives rise to what is called moha. Moha is delusion, confusion. Raga, tosa, moha, these are the three defilements, the three things that dirty up and pollute the mind. These three impurities are caused by the different kinds of feelings. The good feelings, the happy feelings, the nice ones, condition raga, lust, or lopa, greed. That's one kind of defilement. The second kind of defilement is conditioned by the bad feelings, and that's where anger and hatred come from. And then that third kind of feeling, which we should call not yet positive or negative. This is a better way to say it than to say between positive and negative. The feeling that is not yet positive, not yet negative, this conditions the defilement of delusion, confusion, moha. All three defilements, the three kinds of defilements, can be traced to the three kinds of feelings. If we don't understand, and so we should study these defilements also, because if we don't understand these three defilements, we won't understand the feelings sufficiently. We should be very careful about using the word between or in the middle. When we say the third kind of, when we said before that the third feeling is between the good ones and the bad ones, that's dangerous. That can lead to misunderstanding. Because usually when we say in the middle, to be in the middle or between good and evil is safe. But this third kind of feeling isn't safe. It's not really in the middle. So instead, we'll use the words not yet classifiable or unclassifiable. We're not exactly sure. We're not that good at English, so we're not sure what English word to use. But we know the Pali word, and we're very expert at the Pali language. The Pali word is
avahyakata,
which means, vayakata means
not yet classify or unable to classify. Not vayakata, classify or describe. Avahyakata
means unable to categorize, classify, so forth. So we'll use this explanation for that third kind of feeling. Don't think that it's in between the good and the bad, because that won't be a proper way to look at it and will lead to misunderstandings. Now we should understand, if we begin to understand these three kinds of feelings correctly, then it will be very simple to understand the defilements, the kilesa. We can understand all the things that defile and pollute the mind if we understand these three kinds of feelings. The first kind of defilement pulls the mind, attracts the mind. The second kind of defilement is pushing away. And the third kind of defilement is running in circles. These three kinds of defilement are another thing that we need to consider and understand. And this is included in our study of the feelings. So why don't you all get together, have a meeting, and try and figure out what English term to use for this third kind of feeling. This kind of feeling that is not good and it's not evil, but it's not in between. Some people are using the word neutral feeling, which is to completely miss the point. That word won't do at all. We need some word to, and maybe you can help to find the word that expresses the inability to classify this kind of feeling as good or evil. It's like not being quite up to the mark. To be good or evil, it has to have a certain amount of, it has to be clear enough, this way or that way. But when it's not quite up to that mark, then we're unable to classify it one way or the other. So please get together and find the correct term to use, and then make this term known within academic circles, within the people who are talking about such things, because to talk just in terms of positive and negative or good and evil is too shallow, is too limited in understanding. So you can all help to correct this limitation. The thing which we need, which we require, is not between these feelings or caught up in them, but it's above them, it's beyond them. We can say that it's ultra-mundane. To be between these feelings is still to be trapped under their influence. And so look carefully until you can realize that what human life requires and needs is to be above these feelings, beyond them, to reach a level that is, we could call ultra-mundane. All these feelings give rise to desire. The positive, good feelings give rise to the desire to be, to have, to get, to own. It draws in the mind, it pulls in the mind. There's an attachment that's drawing in the mind so that the mind wants to get or have or be that feeling. If it's the unpleasant, negative, bad feelings, then it pushes the mind away. And then the mind doesn't want to be, doesn't want to have, wants to get rid of, wants to destroy that thing. So there are these two kinds of desire. With the third kind of feeling, the one that is neither good nor bad, the kind that is unclassifiable, then the mind wants to know. It wants to know what it is. It's confused, it's uncertain. And so there's an equally powerful desire, the desire to find out what it is, to know what it is. This is the doubt that is always troubling us. This kind of desire is just as powerful and dangerous as the other kinds. And so all of the feelings are giving rise to desires. This third kind of feeling can cause all kinds of problems, just like the other kinds of feeling. When there's this unclassifiable feeling, then there arises fear sometimes, or we don't know whether we want it or don't want it, and this can cause fear. It leads to uncertainty and doubt. Uncertainty and doubt are also defilements. These disturb and trouble the mind, just like all the other defilements, such as anger and greed. When the mind is troubled by this defilement of uncertainty, then that is the old life. But when in the new life the mind is completely freed from, it's spotless, completely unsoiled by uncertainty and all the other defilements, this is the state of mind that we all require. And to achieve it, we must understand these feelings. Another way to look at this that will help you to understand is to take different opposing pairs and compare them. For example, optimistic and pessimistic. There was a very, very well-known German scholar who went around saying that Buddhism was pessimistic. This statement is very unfair. It doesn't do justice to Buddhism at all. Buddhism is beyond both pessimism and optimism. It's neither of them. Nor is it between them. It's above and beyond them. Buddhism is a third thing, which is neither pessimistic nor optimistic. We can call it tathata, or it's Buddhism, instead of being one of these extremes, is just like that, or thusness, suchness. This is probably a new word for most of you, and you may have trouble understanding it right off the bat. But thusness is neither this nor that. It's neither good nor bad. It's just that. It's just thus. Thusness, or suchness. This is the third kind of thing which you should understand, which you should try to understand. This thing that you maybe have never heard about, in Pali it's called tathata, or tathata. We can use either of these pronunciations. It means in Thai chen nan eng, or just thus like, or just like thus, like that. It's not here nor there. It's just like this, just like that. Or thusness, suchness. It's neither pessimistic nor optimistic, but is beyond both pessimism and optimism. It's not caught up in any either extreme of a duality, but it transcends all of the duality, all of those pairs. It's not trapped within any of these dualistic limitations. Tathata is what Buddhism is about. The person who fully realizes, fully penetrates the truth, the reality of Tathata is called an arahant, one who has completely gone beyond all defilement, one who is completely free of all defilement. Another word for this is a perfectly enlightened being, or a perfected human being. This is the arahant, the one who has fully realized the state of thusness, the condition of being just thus. This is what Buddhism is about. There's one more thing we'd like you to know, and that's this point, is that when we come to study, to examine very profound Dhamma, the real deep and subtle truth, we don't have the language to express it. When we want to come to talking about this Dhamma, this very profound thing, all the normal vocabularies that people are using don't have words for these things, because ordinary people aren't interested in profound truth. So in all the vocabularies and languages that people are using, we don't have the words to talk about this thing, Tathata. Tathata is the most profound truth, but we don't know how to express it. When we say in Thai, Chen Nan Eng, Chen means like, Nan is that, Eng is just or merely. So we could say that Tathata means just like that. But this isn't right, because we're using that. And that is the opposite of this. And Tathata is neither this nor that. It's neither in nor out, here nor there. Tathata has nothing to do with any duality. It has nothing to do with this or that. But we don't know what words to use. We're trapped because language doesn't have